Hello, DJ Emo. Welcome to the Air Windows live stream. You're the first one. What I'm going to do today is some plugin making. I have some specific things in mind. And also a guy pitched an idea just before I showed up. So I was in the middle of doing some comment answering on MV. People are saying things like, oh my god, it's a wonderful cathedral. No, it really isn't. MV is not really good. It's just a giant Bloom algorithm. It is nothing, oh god, and it turns out there's a Waves plugin with the same name. Well, this is not that. That is a one slider upward and downward compression. Alrighty then, that's not what this is. And Nick is like, he's not into upward compression. Well, I just kind of haven't worked out where I stand with that kind of stuff and how it would be different from what I do already. Seems to be going over pretty well. Oh no, everybody thinks it's Waves MP2. One person is saying, oh, there's so many ways to do Waves MP2 but cleaner, but that plugin has so much aliasing, like the opposite of the Air Windows model. Funnily enough, I don't always fight aliasing as hard as some. I've got some stuff coming out that should help to address that. In particular, I've got a Purist Console 3 that I need to finish up, and that is coming out where it is some new console version, possibly console 0, but with no concessions whatsoever to filtering. And so it's designed so that you could oversample it if you wanted to, because I am acknowledging that there are people who really hear aliasing stuff. Yeah, there's somebody showing up on single-ended triode. And I don't think it does, no. Ram Spencer has so many questions, I can't answer them all right now. Somebody showed up in Air Windows Study Hour saying it would be nice to see you make a Datamix console or one of those vintage ones. Well, I'm looking to do Quad 8, but I don't actually know what a Datamix is. So I'll answer that and be like, and I'll say, tell me what albums that's on, because that's what I would need to know. I may or may not have them. And Ordinary Monster doesn't understand what console 0 is. They're trying to pan gradually. That doesn't work. So I'll say it's normal because it can't pan gradually, not really. Yeah. So there's somebody who knows what they're going to do with that. Oh, and Fotis wanted to know, I don't know whether Fotis is on the stream or not. I had mentioned a BBC shout out. So in order to answer that, this that I'm watching the stream on, which I'm not like streaming the stream on it, but I'm watching the stream on it. I'd better search my history for BBC.
The best drummer in the world is playing on one song, and Camilo Torrado, who plays tabla
James
and
Holden
stuff, is doing that kind of stuff.
And you've also been doing good. Yeah, I think my wife probably doesn't listen just because I think it would be almost entirely critical. Because I have no memory whatsoever of anything. I don't really know what's going on.
It's
just trying to get, as you said, just trying to get through it without looking too stupid. Really,
James is maybe a bit of a party guy
with every show. Listen, thank you so much for coming on.
That's
amazingly excited that this new album is out. I'm staying that it's in.
That's a good compliment. Yeah, exactly. And I've been doing, in between, I've had a lot of adventures doing smaller collaborations.
Yeah, sure.
It's nice to
kind of listen through. Have you recorded this in the same way? Obviously, with the Animal Spirits, it was that this time.
So with the Animal Spirits, I had this kind of, it was like a dogma kind of manifesto of rules of like no overdubs, no edits, and I had 5, 6, 7. So
this is the BBC interview I was talking
together,
about.
all playing at once, and there's no possibility of making an edit. I made a rod for my own back, and mixing it, I almost went mad trying to mix it differently.
Sure, but then the part of the joy of, I guess, punchy to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You can't fake that as well.
Exactly. So when
the
you're
whole
thinking
video's
about
worth
not
watching.
doing that, are you
Trying to have a little bit of that, but then kind of giving myself the freedom to a kind of like the accidents, the things where thank you, Jesus.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are using Ableton. Because I know you
like this guy's style,
making your own equipment.
Yeah, and software, that's my big thing at the moment, like making my whole environment that I play music in software.
So if you're using Ableton, do you kind of using some things that the kind of the common man can get their hands on? It's not just all this kind of crazy stuff you've created.
No, exactly. It's a real mix of. I don't want it to be some kind of elitist thing. I like my software. Sure. I really, when it's finished, I'm going to give it away on my website for sure. Like I want people to have these tools, and a lot of the software I'm using. Use these plugins by this guy called Air Windows, who puts them up for free. If you can't afford to pay, you can have them for free.
Okay.
So like you don't need expensive stuff, and I do use like basic Ableton for like mixing. But I do really like to make for my music. I really like to make little living systems, and like the arpeggio. Kind of, you can move the pitch of the arpeggio, but if you move it to the wrong place, the drums are going to go funny and stuff like that. Like
Yeah, if he was using VCV Rack, he could use all the plugins in inappropriate ways in Rack. But yeah, that's the thing. I was asked what the shout out is. That's the one. That was nice. So yeah, no further things in. Who's getting interviewed? The guy that I just mentioned, James Holden, I think I said. And that is who that is. So, Christopher Merwindow's got a shout out on BBC 6, which is not BBC 1, but that's still a BBC radio. I'm not sure how big BBC 6 is related to any other BBCs that you might possibly have. But, that is legit. I am pretty pleased with where that stands, and that was a cool thing to discover that day. Plus, I just enjoyed the way that he's talking. I enjoy what this guy is saying, James, when he's talking about wanting access to musical tools, not to be this elitist thing. He's going to, I mean, man, if he puts his stuff up on a website, and either he would like, or if he's including my plugins, which is a nice tie-in, I'll totally shout it out and link to it. So if you want a little signal boost for your sharing your stuff, James, I will be more than happy to help. I don't have as much reach as you or the BBC. But I'll tell you one thing. The people who follow what I do also like that point of view, so you can find some friends there. And yeah. So let's see now. The things I'm busy doing today, because it's only 11:09, and I have things to do today. And I'm probably going to try to avoid chatting to the chat too much, but I can still be aware to some extent. Unlike last time when I just did an enormous amount of audio playing, and I can probably still do some of that, but I'd like to be coding plugins because I'm catching up on the number of plugins that I've done. And there were a couple of things I was thinking to try. One of them is, here, let me move this over. I'd left some notes for myself. Here, what's this? Boop. We've got that. And then now I have my close-up for the little box in there. Technically, I could make it larger, but I'm not sure I feel like doing that on stream. In particular, I'm not sure if I want to bother doing with that if it is only, it's not really the point of what I'm doing. Like I said, I keep trying to work on things, and so that is the element of me working on stuff and trying to keep things going. So one of my notes here is defining expressions. And I was wondering whether maybe I can make some of my code take up less space or be more direct by like doing defines. Because the way that works in C compilers is it will like go and calculate all of the defines before actually running the compilation of the program. What that means is anything that I do with defines, whether it's like useful or whether it's just ridiculous or whatever sort of thing that might be, it doesn't actually affect the execution of the program. It's a way of making stuff look simpler, presumably for being more understandable, but it could also make things more obfuscated, and people sometimes use it for that. But yeah, this is a standard C thing. So it's a way of making stuff, in this case, it makes it look as if it is a math expression, but it's really not. It is just a, like you can probably see what this is. I don't think I can make it larger by expanding it. No, I can't. But I am streaming it, so you can see the screen. The stuff that it says up here, I'm not sure you need to include stand.io. I know you need to do it for this program because this is a program that would actually run. The stuff that I do wouldn't use standard IOH. But they're doing a thing that is define max xy, and then there's all these parentheses, and I'll tell you why they exist. If you define max xy and it includes this x comma y, presumably that counts as numbers. I'm not quite sure how they work define, because it's clearly not just word replacement. Otherwise, how would you know this x gets swapped out for whatever you included and this capital X does not? It's probably, well, honestly, I don't know. But when you define something like that, it's probably looking for the stuff in the parentheses, and then it's able to use it in whatever it spit out. So it's taking this chunk of code here, and the important thing is to remember there's no such thing as max. That doesn't exist in C. But you can type that, and then this smaller, the 97,23, and I do not know whether you get any number of commas and things in there. They're not telling me whether you get to put as many things in between the commas as you want, or whether it can only be numbers. If it is numbers, what kinds of numbers is this? but it's a bit of a moot point because it's not really reading those things in as numbers. What it is doing is swapping out this max 9723 for parentheses 97 unparentheses greater than parentheses 23 unparentheses question mark, and then parentheses 97 unparentheses colon parentheses 23, and then 2 parentheses to end it off. And what you get out of that is a little small mathematical expression that uses stuff that is included in the C library. So what that's going to do is do 97 greater than 23 question mark. And if the answer is yes, it's the first thing before the colon. And if the answer is no, it's the second thing. And so it does what a max function would do. But yeah, that's one of the things I'm looking at. Let me clean this up. We're doing a new look for the coding streams today where it's not like matrix themed. That's not because I'm worried about using copyrighted themes so much as just I don't really need to do that so much. And the look of the actual stream, like if I go to here, I am still trying to move in the direction of doing music making stuff, and this might work for that. So if I can do that, what you will see, and it's probably worth me adjusting this camera. Give me a second. What you will see is maybe I won't even be able to see the chat anymore if I really get rolling. But or indeed. And then if I'm not playing an instrument, you can either kind of see this, and I do know how to focus on it, and I could be working on that or whatever, or just over to the the overall camera. Oh, I actually have not switched over to the overall camera. But over to the overall camera, and it'd be a thing of me just sort of derping around thinking up music and figuring out a way to make it happen. The kind of stuff where I you pull in the back left corner. Well, it's not quite as easy as that, but yeah. Nilo observes, I love the guitar. Well, I like that guitar was actually for sale at Retro Music at one point. I had traveled and had a bunch of stuff that was kind of there for being got rid of at the time. And it was sitting in Retro Music with all of the things in it, because I only had so many like favorite guitars, but It's an Ibanez. It's not a Gibson or something. And it's got this switch, which is a Gibson Veritone switch, but it's made by somebody else. And what that is it's an inductor and a capacitor. On the Les Paul, which actually is a Gibson, but it's apparently a bad quality Les Paul, so I got it for very cheaply. I've got another one of those, and I have a switch that lets me switch between that effect, which is a inductor and a capacitor to ground. So the Veritone is inductor and capacitor to ground, so it's a notch filter. And that can be heard on... I know this didn't get my channel knocked off of the internet, so I can briefly do this. It'll be underneath. So you can very likely hear the Veritone sound on, for instance, yes, it's close to the edge. That's almost certainly a Veritone because Steve Howe was using a Gibson 335 with a Veritone at 355, 345 with a Veritone circuit. And the thing about musicians and synthesizer people is if they get a new toy, they use it on everything. So I'm thinking a bunch of these close to the edge sounds are distinctly Veritone sounds. And then I flipped it around. Yeah, I've got one of those. The switch that I put in, the one that's in the Gibson, switches it so that instead of running it to ground, you can also have it be running it to the only output of the guitar, making it a bandpass. And when you do that, you have the same frequency positions, but it doesn't sound anything like the notch filter, because the notch filter is very effective, but switching it to a bandpass doesn't sound anything like the opposite, a really tight, narrow peak filter. Instead, it's this very broad filter. I'm wondering whether it's worth, it's plugged in. Why should I just talk about this? One of the things I would like to learn to do is when I'm doing these live streams and things, and granted that sometimes I'm going to need to do it without streaming so that I'm not constantly distracted by demonstrating stuff, but I bet you I can show you what I'm talking about. This itty bitty battery amp is there for a reason. This guitar is out of tune. The strings are kind of new. I don't think it can blow the microphone. A little bit loud. That'll come in handy for if I want to make a sound similar to that this one. So, I won't worry about tuning because it's not like I'm actually making any music. I just wanted to demonstrate this thing. Back to here. Here's our treble pickup. Actually, I might almost go for the, this is under one another wire. Neck pickup. So if I do the baritone thing, the first setting is the B.B. King setting. It's a notch that's very high frequency. So I'll do the treble again. Back off. And that's a really high frequency notch filter. But it keeps going. You get a lot more options than that. I'll switch it through all of them as the sustain goes. So what you get when you have this distorted electric guitar and you have a big notch filter right in the mid-range. Some people consider this the terrible tone filter, but they're dead wrong, because it's what you do with it. You can go like, well, if you go from this to this, you go, where'd the sound go? It just made it sound bad. It sounds like I've cupped my hands around my ears, right? The very end one, number 6, is eating up all the bass. Like, this is the neck pickup, not even the bridge pickup, it's the neck pickup, which would be going like this. And it took everything away. But if you then crank it way up, or step it away from that bassiest one. And that's the kind of sound that Steve Howe might have been using in some of those close to the edge tracks. Just to clarify everything, it's got a real spike to it, a real edge to it. But I mentioned that using this little switch here reverses the effect. So instead of the inductor and capacitor going to ground, for that just ice pick, really aggressive tone, Steve Howe ended up going to a Telecaster for later albums like Relayer and Drama. I'm pretty sure he had a Telecaster going on for some of Drama, but I know that a Relayer was a Telecaster into a horrible little PV. And I think Relayer was another one of the Neve, well, not, they started out with Neve, but then I can't actually make that shut up. I do believe they went to a Quad 8, and since I would have I captured this or have I not? It's under R. No, I guess not. Okay. I have another album to capture because Yes's Relayer may well have been I'm not going to guarantee that it was. I could be wrong, but it may well have been off of a Quad 8, and it has that characteristic sound, just the really sort of pungent, aggressive harmonics on stuff. Quad 8 had a simpler EQ, and compared to things like an A range, compared to the Neve, which wasn't quite similar but not quite the same. So yeah, here's your ice pick sound, right? Going through the pickup and then through the inductor and capacitor in series, but not to ground. Instead, all the sound has to go to that. It's almost like a wah pedal sound, but not, because it's not tightly focused enough. It's subtle. And if you have the entire thing switched out, rather than having a full open sound, you have silence because it's not assigned to anything. We're switching in the end result of this. And so what in the normal setting, let's go back off of the super distortion again. That's arguably I can make that work, but it's very bright. So here's your fan sound. And this is the sound with the inductor and capacitor to ground. Then you hit the switch. Now you're going only through the inductor and capacitor. And it sounds kind of a lot like the full tone, but it's not quite because it's rounding off the frequency extremes a little bit. The inductor is not going to let high frequencies come through as much, and the capacitor is not going to let low frequencies come through at all. So if you have this low frequency capacitor that was doing a low frequency notch, that's going to let more bass through. Does a fairly good job, but it's still cutting off the low bass a little bit. And it's going to step on the highs quite a lot. This is without, and then this is with. It's darkened up quite a bit. But then as we're hitting these low notes, right, you still have low frequencies here, but as you go to, I'm not going to let the neighbor's hair stand up with a Marshall MS2 Micro. This is a little tiny amp. That's not going to be a problem, but it only sounds loud because I've got a good microphone in here. As we start going to the stuff where it was just darkening the brightest of the highs, just before we get to not connected at all, now we've got a bandpass filter. It's letting some highs through, although it's still restricting them a little bit. But it's restricting the lows quite a lot. This is the neck pickup. This is what it would be. And that's what it is now. And then, of course, we can turn the distortion back on just for a moment before going on to other things. the alternate way of doing the varitone circuit, and it's a mid-range bump, and it's taking out all the lows. So we can voice where in the mid-range it's supposed to sit. Low in the mid-range. Or much higher in the mid-range. And this is the sort of thing that you could do and run into like an interface if you only had in the box amps and things. If you didn't even have the battery amp, much less a real amp, and you had to get better sounds off of your guitar, but you had to run it in the box, what you can do is some of this pre-processing in advance, or for that matter, do that and then get a stomp box and get some of your distortion done in analog, and then capture the result of the stomp box. I've actually done that for some of the things that I've and then of course we can go to that Steve Howe thing. That's the difference between a notch in the guitar before it even gets distorted and a really gradual peak in the guitar. Which is going to be a lot smoother for everything. Compared to the notch. Which is just a lot more fragmented. It just breaks up a lot easier. And there you have it. I'm going to leave that cable plugged in, but rather than play these strings to death, since I have only just recently changed them, the fun thing about the Ibanez, the big hollow body, is that I've recently gotten a set of jazz flat wounds for it. Like I'll show you. So the strings on this are not actually round wounds anymore. They're jazz flat wounds. But I had to do a thing that they used to do back in the day. This is back in the mid 60s when this was first coming out. Nobody made strings for rock guitar players and like that at the time. It wasn't even a thing. And so you'd have these big heavy strings that were like you'd put on an acoustic guitar or whatever. And the deal with that is if the strings are really heavy, unless you're Stevie Ray Vaughan, you can't bend them as easily as that. And so there were people who showed up. I believe it started out with either James Burton or James Buchanan, a Telecaster player. James Buchanan was a wild guy. I think James Burton was more chill and was known for a paisley wallpaper on his telly. But what they did, and what got discovered by the rock guitar players of the day, was they bought a banjo string for the top string. And then they bought a set of guitar strings, and they threw the bottom string away. And then the second one becomes the bottom string, and so on. And then they replaced the top string with the banjo string, and then they had a modern guitar light grade set, which is what this is. I usually play like your Ernie Ball pink color of ultralight. So the top string's like a 9. And this is actually a set of flats. And it's, I think, a set of I chose the gauges so that it would be the same as the Ernie Ball set, as close as I could get them. That also means that the G string with the bends that string is now not wound. It is a bare metal string like the top 3 strings. Otherwise, it would be only the top 2 strings as bare strings. So that's what I've done with the hollow body, because I wanted to see what it would be like to have this one get a sort of more dull, less chimey sound. Although when you get new flat wound strings, it's still kind of chimey, honestly. It still has a certain amount of chime to it. But they should still sound good as they go more dead, because this is the style of string that sounds good that way. And I'm looking to maybe use this guitar for like cleaner sounds along the same lines, and just get more stuff together as far as making music and not just plugins, not just tools for stuff. That said, we have tools and stuff to make today, and another hour and 20 minutes or so to set up to do that. I don't actually know what you mean by the saturation plug in console 6 progressions. Excuse me. I'm just having a peek on the comments and stuff. Infernal Starway, hello. I know that one observation. Yeah, Nilo mentioned the bokeh is always so magical in your videos. That's the lens. I'm going to shout out the lens that I used for making that happen, because I'm a big fan of them. And it is SLR Magic. They're SLR Magic prime lenses. Something Cine. And they're for Micro Four Thirds. So what you're seeing is the combination of Blackmagic cameras and SLR Magic lenses is what I'm doing. And then the sort of faint haziness that I get, that is coming off of a Tiffin Smoke 2 filter. So it's not actually putting any smoke into the room, but it's softening things up a little bit. If without that, everything would be a little more contrasty and kind of aggressively clear where the places are in focus. And the idea of doing that is just to sort of lean towards film looks and that kind of thing. But rather than trying to do those things in the box, it's like trying to do them using kind of like what I was talking about, like getting sounds in the guitar and in the wiring of the guitar and in pickups and things, rather than trying to do that kind of stuff in the box. Trying to do camera stuff in the lens and in the filter, and then capture that, and we're streaming that to YouTube pretty directly, and that's what we got. So without further ado, let's jump into the coding again, shall we? finish off my coffee. My coffee tastes a little bit weird because I have B vitamin in here today. Knowing that I might need all the stamina in the world. One of the things that I picked up from somebody that I spent a bunch of time with was I started getting Ollie gummy vitamins, and that means that rather than living on coffee and chicken and rice and stuff, I'm now eating vitamins, and among them D vitamin on the regular, which, considering the fact that I see no sunlight and never get out, that is, I think, a useful, helpful thing. So what we got, oh, and also I use washcloths rather than paper towels for a whole bunch of stuff, which is good. You should learn to do stuff like that. But yeah, what we've got is, let me move this out of the way. A couple of ideas. One of them was I was interested in exploring how to make my tape delay algorithm slow down rather than just speed up. And that might be something worth fooling with. But then somebody suggested something. I had a poster on something somewhere. They say, hey, you said that YouTube comments is the best way to get you a message a few videos ago. And I'm like, yep, I'm going to try to respond to that stuff because, and by that I mean Air Windows things and plugin suggestions and stuff. That would be about the engagement of if people are typing in plugin suggestions into the YouTube comments. YouTube considers that to be, oh, people are paying attention and they are watching, the video and talking. And so it's a darn good place to make suggestions about things like that. This is what he's suggesting. I've been playing with Sinoid folding devices and had a great idea that I was hoping could be put to use. And so we'll see whether we can do this today. And I also said, yep, I hope that you have, you're okay with an MIT license, because otherwise this will never see the light of day. That said, it's probably going to say okay. And that means we can do this thing. So the idea is a normal sinoid fold, meaning run into a, let me open this up. I bet I can do this. I'm considering whether I want it to be a density variation or something. I have to go to the, depending upon how many things I have going on in my world, sometimes all of this stuff can be really overwhelming and I can't really effectively do anything, but I have some ideas here that I'd like to explore, so I'm going to try to be focused enough to do those. And that will mean looking up something like, for instance, density. I probably don't need density. I don't remember what density 2 is. Oh, Infernal has a question on console. Yeah, the console 0, 7 using console 8. What do you mean using 2 instances of console 0 because you have 2 layers of bus? Because on the whole, like, console 0 is the same as most previous versions of console. It's just limited in terms of how you can pan and dynamic volume things. And light tunnel lamps, I'm not going to be able to do any work on my house. My fervent hope is that I can get the outside siding or painted or something before it literally rots away. a lot of the stuff that I did with Air Windows precludes me being able to maintain my house, and so that kind of gets in the way. But yeah, I will not be able to put light tonal lamps into the roof, although I don't need to, because what you can't see, here is one of the secrets of video making and stuff, is the stream looks kind of chill and dark, right? Well, I'm staring directly into 3 blinding LED lights. It just looks dark because the camera is set with an aperture that's kind of restricted. Like, watch this. It can actually be kind of this bright. So we'll go back to what it was. Yeah, so being able to get hit with enough light, that's something that will make a lot of sense in the winter as well. So I'm not going to need light tonal lamps. Although I do need to pay attention to either the light or the vitamin D or both, because the studio is fully in studio mode again. And I totally stepped away from having windows exposed, partly because well, I'm sure you're not wrong, ER, but this is what I got. The having the windows open and working as actual windows would be leading to this place being unbearably hot in the summer, and we are getting into the summer. So what I'm doing now, although it's kind of like being on a spaceship, it does mean that I can weather changes in weather more effectively. It'll stay warmer in the winter as well. And it's been doing really well as far as not being too cold and too hot in the summer. But Sinoid fold, density 2. What have we actually got going on in density 2? This, density 2, was the version that used a funny sort of, this was what I was doing to try to deal with aliasing back in, when was it? I can find out. Well, it wasn't 2021, so I'm not sure what this is about, but this is not the one that I want. It's way too complicated. So let's find density 1. If I'm coughing, forgive me. I'm not that well. Well enough to do a couple of hours of live stream, though. And hopefully will be a little simpler. Some of this stuff we're not going to use, but this is kind of the guts of density. Maybe what I should do is make it density 3 and just explain that this was the purpose of it. Because what this person is saying is this. Up here, it's doing the sine version in a particular way. But all you really need to do is this. All you really need to do is sine whatever the thing is. But up here, it keeps saying, you know, if this is larger than or less than negative 1.5, etc., which is the same as pi underscore 2, pi divided by 2, then it limits it, it clamps it. So what's being asked, he says, a normal sinoid fold, by which I would say run the thing into a sine algorithm and use that, causes always to fold back to origin instead of clipping, which is also not true because it folds back to origin and then goes round to negative and then back again. And then further amplitude will cause the wave to continue to extend to clipping threshold and being folded back to origin ad infinitum. And again, he's wrong because it goes to negative and then back to 0. But he says, I would love to use a sinoid folding algorithm. I should look at Fracture. Fracture is probably the one that I'm looking at. Facet does something else entirely, but Fracture is the one that literally does wavefolding. Just a moment. This is a better idea. Yeah. See here we've got an even simpler little program, and it's doing the same kinds of things. And what we've got is, let's do some of this. I'm not going to plug the audio into the laptop unless I have to, because the noises this is going to make are obnoxious enough that maybe we don't want to hear them directly. Okay, never mind. That bass note is so low that we can't hear it unless we run it into the big speakers, and so I need to run it into the big speakers. And thus we do so. Here's a note. I also need to work on these subwoofers. You can hear them kind of buzzing, and so I went to Parts Express and found some subwoofer enclosures that you can make. I mean, I made my guitar amp speaker enclosure out of just raw 4x8, well, no, were they 4x8s? Raw pieces of wood. But I didn't want to do that for just a couple of little boxes, and I wanted the holes in them pre-cut, so I went to Parts Express and got some subwoofer boxes. So yeah, this is literally wavefolding. JLo scenes. Do you perhaps mean Venetian blinds? You know, I've got cellular shades in there right now. What's going on at the moment is the windows that are completely covered over that you can't see have a layer of insulation film inside the windows themselves, which is another airspace, and then a layer of silvered mylar blocking light coming in, and that's another airspace, and then the cellular shades that are still there, and that's a sort of little enclosures of airspace, and then big old black drapes across those. And so the layers of airspaces inside there are not just blocking out light so that I can do video shooting, but are also doing a pretty incredible job of thermal insulation. And that's why it's not hot in here. Even if it is 120 degrees out there, it's still not going to be hot in here. Mind you, most people wouldn't want to go to that extreme or deal with the consequences of covering up the windows that much. But I mean, it does work. Anyway, and I don't usually need to do things as remote controlled things. When I need to do stuff, I generally just do it, you know, like manually flipped power strips and things, and turning things on and off by flipping their switches. Wavefolding. Fracture. So here's what Fracture does. We've got this output wave, and this is our original sound, kinda. That noise is a sound from outside. That's a truck of some kind. You notice how we're starting to hear a noise come out? Now it's a different note. This is wavefolding. And the way it's done is we are running the sine wave into another sine function, and it's wrapping around. So if we do something like this, and and apply that. Oh, interesting. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping that. We're cutting it off. Let's undo this. Also, some of this stuff tends to block out a view of the... I'm able to overwhelm this video converter from the laptop with certain settings on this program, so I'm going to try to avoid doing that. Looks like I have... Oh, no, Fracture1, that's why it's doing that. So this is the number of times you can wrap. So Fracture1 means we're turning it into a little dot that's taking a certain amount of space. Fracture2 is going to mean you can go a little farther. Fracture3 we'll go even farther. And yeah, what we can see here is we're generating the onset and output, but Fracture cuts off. Let us definitely make a Fracture2 today. And this is simple enough, I bet I can do it by the time I'm ready to be done with the stream for the day. So as you can see, what we have turned using Fracture, and we seem to have select auto snapping to zero crossing, I don't need that. Taking a sine wave, and where it would normally go looping over and then come back to here, Fracture is taking that and turning it into a wavefold, meaning it's generating these higher frequency sounds. Oh, the VCV rack version of all of this is going to love Fracture2. If it didn't cut off at this point, if it kept going, we would start seeing a slowing of this behavior. And then somewhere in the middle, it would sort of cross over, or make a sort of, the end of the wave would be like, and then it would go back into this weird stuff again. It's not doing that because apparently I'm stopping it from doing it, but we're going to change that. And we're going to change that right now without saving, because I don't want to save that. Firstly, new project, doesn't need to be a stereo. This will be good. This was definitely a thing that needs to happen, and I will be able to incorporate what Adam Zwierzyński would like to see happen. Because what I was saying about this, you kind of can see, but I got distracted by the fact that it's doing an unexpected thing. So let's firstly see, there is nothing I need to save. There are no stored variables anywhere. And also note this will create aliasing. I'm not going to worry about that for this one. This is one of your sort of math-based ones that needs to be simple rather than the ones that sound like an analog device. So over to here, we've got all of these controls we're not going to use, and it looks the same down there. Likewise, Fracture, let's see. So this one has some unusual settings, but we're not going to be using all of these. We're going to be doing something different. In particular, we do not want kparam2 to do what it's doing. It was just cutting off what Fracture could do, and that's fine, but that's still going to be available in the plugin Fracture. We're going to do something else. This is a boost, so we'd be turning this up to 4, and everything else is just generic. So we'll go from there. Actually, let's firstly jump into that place, and for now we will turn this up to 4. But then we're going to go in and edit the H file so we know what we're setting. I promise most likely I'll hang in there for long enough to finish this plugin. One hopes. here's what we got, except for we're going to change what one of these means. So we got that. We're probably going to call that output. And fracture is a weird way of describing that. So what they're looking for is threshold. So we're going to change this to threshold, and it's not going to be used right away. But this will be a whole new level of useful for this kind of thing. In fact, I am so confident of it that I could almost start deleting the extra controls now, but I'm not going to bother. Because I know what this algorithm does and what it's going to need to do. Neither of these is going to have anything in initialize or reset. See, here's reset. And they say the same thing. We don't have a value in here that we need to blank out. And this is a really old plugin because it says register. That's not actually useful for any modern computers. You don't need to do this. There's no purpose in doing this. This is from back when I thought that was a good idea. I wonder if I have. Yeah, this was 2008. That's an old one. And this got changed when people needed the licensing to be in the actual files. I changed the thing so that it says Airwindows uses the MIT license. Because I had that in my I had that in the code repository. But somebody or other was asking, like, well, it's not in the files. How do we know it's in the files? And so I included that. Anyways, what we can do from here on in is like grab some of these things and leave some of these things out, actually. So we're not going to care about this because this is going to be sample rate independent. And we're replacing these. But we're not going to use parameter 2 yet. And then we're going to replicate what's in here. And my template doesn't seem to be updated yet, but I keep having to do this. I keep having to blank out the long double, which we don't do anymore, because there's really no purpose. Going with long double gets you like 3 more bits of mantissa, and all the extra bits that it adds are in exponent, which is useless. So let's see. And this is not correct, but let's copy this so we can close the file. So we are using, no, this is redefining what, we don't want that. We are using dry wet, so this will just work, right? This is built in. We're going to want to keep this. This is what we have under here, so we don't have to care about that. We actually can do an output level, but we don't need any of this. And we're going to keep this. We've got input sample multiplied by as much as 4. Oh, and also we're multiplying it by fracture, so let's put this back just for now. I'm also going to turn these to double. It'll save me time when I need to do it to VST. And we're not going to need these. I don't anticipate needing them. And we're not going to need that. The stuff that is part of the actual function call, like void, Fracture2 kernel process, const float 32 in source P, and when it says const float 32 source P equals in P, I'm not changing those to like float or double or something, because I feel like if we're using this specially declared size for the variable for these things that communicate with the core audio itself, I don't want to change those. But these I'm okay with just using C language double precision calculation. And like I said, it will go to the it'll convert to the VST easier if I don't have to change that when I go for the VST. I'll just have to be like, instead of get parameter 4, we'll call it D. But yeah. So Fracture was an integer. I could change it, but I don't really want to. And what was it, 1 to 3? What I can do is make it be like that just for now, which also means I will have to update the what it started out as. So we're going to go back to that again, just because now this is acting like the integer that it was, at least a little bit. I have not put in the threshold code yet. And these are the, in fact, whatever. Now it's exactly the way that it was, and we'll just change it when we need to change it. But this is now something that will work the way that the original one did. Meaning that if we do it this way, we're multiplying input sample by density, so that's just a pad on the input coming in. Then we are using this special control, by that I mean variable, and that is a way of doing the sine function. At the time that I did this, it didn't really occur to me that sine functions work just as good in negative as they do in positive. Exactly the same thing happens. So all of this is completely unneeded. I had a little comment on simple as that. Well, it can get a lot simpler, and I will show you how. All of this is going to do the same thing as, make a little space, this, except that without this part. That's what made it stop going at a certain number of times. Like I had 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. All that was doing was just ramping up the gain going into the whole thing so that it would make it go into higher frequency pitches, but then it would also cut off. And Fracture is multiplied by 3.1415. It's multiplied by pi. And you could multiply it by pi underscore 2, which is 1.57, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, we can simplify that by doing that. And the stuff we're doing here, since we want to omit this part, right? So we're doing all this fancy stuff and it had stopped doing, you remember when I was running that, it would go like, and then it would cut off. And then it would go again. I must have tried this and decided I didn't like the sound of it, but now I want to go for what it would have done otherwise. And we will hear what that does. But if I take away that, it's no longer stopping at that point. Which means that all of this together is nothing but this. These two things are now the same. Hey, Paul Channel Strip. So when I said simple as that in the code for Fracture, I was wildly overestimating things because or honestly, we can add it up here while we're at it. Destiny is times equal politics blogger. Fracture. And then I have to put a semicolon at the end. So that is multiplying those two together, meaning I don't need to do this any longer. And now, yeah, see? And that's how simple it really is. And let us illustrate that by, oh, I forgot a thing. I mean, that part's normal, don't worry about that, but I forgot a thing. Trigraph, question, ignored. And that means I need to, Fracture would be FRAC. Typically the codes that I use are just as close as I can get to the name of the plugin. So there's no way the Fracture plugin is not FRAC. So instead of FRAC, it's one more, which is FRAD. And that is the ID for the plugin. And in this case, this should build first time and work fine. And if we can get this to go, then we can start doing what the guy was asking for. But I wanted to show a particular thing, and we are going to show that particular thing. So here's our sign. So let's go back to this, right? Remember how we did this? And that's what you get. Maybe a little hard to see until I click it. I am happy to say that the entire screen didn't go to black though, so that's cool. And how I wanted it to stop, just cutting off at this point. Well, here we have it's being a little clicky. In fact, it's being clicky to the point where it might be worth it for me to to include the smoothing thing that it does. That could be worth doing. But we do the same thing, but instead this time we get this. This is properly what you expect out of a wave folder. And the crossover point of the wave is actually like this. Here we can even the crossover point of the wave is like here, and the full wave is like this, and this is what wavefolding is. It's going up until it wraps around, and contrary to what the fellow says, oh, there you are. By God, I'm doing your thing. We are doing your thing. So when I say the fellow, what I mean is this fellow who just showed up in chat. Adam, we're doing your plugin. And this is actually what you get until we change it to be what you suggested, which is going to be very interesting and amusing. But the voice, it does not fold back to origin. It's folding back to the full travel of the sine algorithm. So it goes right back through origin to negative again. Doing the thing you suggested will mean that, here, let us undo all of this stuff and do a simpler form. Enough that we can hear it, and that should be good. But yeah, the way the wavefolding thing works is the harder you push it, the more high frequency that little overtone will be. And it must have taken that out simply because they didn't like the way that it was sounding or something. So here is what our actual waveform is. And I'm going to go back to selecting the zero crossing. So this is one side of the waveform. It's going up and then wrapping all the way around and then going back again, and then it starts to come through. This is how the wavefold works. And what Adam was suggesting is, wouldn't it be cool if you could just make it so that rather than wrap it around and back to origin, or as actually happens, back to fully negative, the opposite extreme, you could start controlling that. So instead, you have a control where it limits it to the all threshold of 0 or threshold of 1 or whatever would be just full clipping. That it would just go back to nothing again. I'm not expressing that well. Yeah, so DC offset introduced so that instead of crossing over origin, it's folded additional times back towards clipping. Well, I'm not sure that folding it additional times is how that's going to work, but we'll see. One thing I am considering is that it seems like it's possible, and this is a good time to show up because then we can talk about this and figure out what to do. It seems to me easy enough to put in a thing where we're scaling what we've got here so that it is increasingly towards a square wave type shape, because we can always change the behavior as we hit pi_2. And that might be worth, actually I don't know if I even need to code it to demonstrate it. We've seen this kind of thing before. If you clip the input signal after amplifying it so much, we can make it so it just goes straight up to this point and then it's a hard clip until it comes back around again. That's what that does. It's the smoothest form of clipping, but that's not what we're looking to do. So So what I am now wondering is, then what shall we do? You're talking about folding it additional times. Well, it sounds like, so talk with me about this, because I think I get what you're looking to do, and what is the most obvious thing to do would not have that effect. I can give you a thing where it goes to a clipped note, and then the clipped note will have the overtone that you hear more and more faintly applied, and this could very well be a perfectly reasonable thing to add to this. This is something that we could do. Might be worth doing. My question is, do you want the note that is produced to be just overlaid on top of the fat saturated square wave type sound to any desirable amount? Like you have a little resonance control. Probably be a good way to call it is you could call it resonance, because that's how it would act. And then you could have it just be a faint overtone on top of the waveform, or you can have it go all the way down to neutral, or it can be fully like this. That could be worth doing. Or, sorry, excuse me. Or do we want to, origin, I would call that the crossover, yeah. So far so good. Or we could start increasing the gain as we go beyond clipping. And that will make the pitch go crazy. Rather than having a single overtone, it will start going higher pitched rather than just a single note. And by that I mean we can hear this. Actually, we can't hear that very well, but I think I've seen enough of that for now, and we'll fire it up again. So this note, and I definitely need to declick this, that's for sure, but the pitch you hear, and we can make it as bright as you like, that is the gain going in. And assuming that we have a sine going in. Different kinds of waves will give you different kinds of sounds here. That's a fixed note. Do you want it to remain a fixed note and just alter the volume of it, because that'll be very straightforward? Or do we want to make the note go crazy? Well, I've got paper. Give me a second. Best Air Windows is Magic Marker Air Windows with, a Sharpie marker. Oh, I'm definitely thinking sonically, but at the same time I know I can do what we're doing. I'm thinking like this, going up, and then any desired amount of restriction of the top wiggly bit. And distance from crossover, it can go down as far as you like. If this is our center point, we can go all the way down, or we can go like exactly to the crossover, meaning that the other side of the wave will do the opposite. Is that what you're talking about? Because our bass behavior, as you saw, is going all the way through the origin point to the other side with every wavefold. and that loses us some of the fundamental tone. And we can dial in any amount of that we want. So it's probably worth doing. That's going to be pretty straightforward, probably. I mean, what we've got is lovely and straightforward. Let's make a lot of space to work with. Well, I'll tell you one thing that we could conceivably do. I can break up that sound. This is now going to do a super different thing. So instead of just putting increasing gain, now what we've got is as we get louder, it's going to continue to sharpen the overtone, and that's going to have a characteristic effect all its own. And we're going to hear what that sounds like now. Love old versions of macOS that let you immediately use a plugin rather than having to reboot to see it. Nope, I think I got where you're at, Adam. So the difference between the previous one and this one is like this. We can do this, but then if we are increasing this, it starts to get a little weirder. Although honestly, it does not seem that just gave me a more fixed. But that's interesting. I have a different way of approaching this thing, but it's not doing what I thought it was going to do. We have an algorithm that gives me a really accurate overtone pitch that I did not expect, and yet I should have seen it coming, since we're working with sines and all. So what was happening there as the waveform goes up, I'm sort of increasingly adding it, and that I was thinking I was going to get a more exponential behavior, and maybe I still can. Give me a second. We're not done. Don't save that. Let's do multiple stages of this. could be really getting to a weird result. I know that. One thing about it, we're going to get a really intense fracture out of the end of this. And it should be very helpful for the VCV rack thing. Oh, this is literally wavefolding, yeah. This is all about the wavefolding. And param2 is in fact a integer because we fell back on having it be the same as it was in the original fracture. That also means we can go way beyond this. So, and I have more gain on tap than I expected in density, so that's fine too. We're not doing this. So fracture is kind of our limit there. It's the amount that we're doing it, but or see, I'm just thinking in terms of how would I want this arranged, because fracture no longer needs to have anything to do with m pi. Oh, Adam, I don't think it would do anything like that. We can make the folds be DC offset on both plus and minus side of the equation just by scaling everything appropriately, and pi is going to enter into that scaling factor. There'll be a little bit of fooling around with that, I'm sure, but a lot of plus and minus of m pi. Or no, because that's what we're getting out is literally 1 to -1. Plus and minus is stuff, put it that way. But yeah, I mean, the folds could be DC offset in such a way that there would be no crossover until the wave cycle repeats. We can put a threshold control in that fades between what we're hearing and essentially a saturated square wave. That's what you're describing. So modulate extreme amounts of gain to have momentary distortion of the incoming signal. It would turn into a soft clipper. What you're describing is a soft clipper. You're describing a soft clipper with a dial-in amount of this overtone, where it will hit a sound, whether that be the overtone or whatever else, that only happens when you're distorting. It only happens once you clip past a certain amount, at which point that sound comes in. And it'll only be a note on a sine wave. On other things, it will sound different. And it'll be like a kind of grungification for a lot of different kinds of... It's kind of like using Chebyshev filters, which only give you exact notes out if you feed sine waves in. Otherwise, they're just changing the tone of it. It'll be kind of like this. But what we're thinking about now, since we have stages, is my brain is too fried at the moment to remember what for loops are for. Let's go and find one. I realize that is silly, but I do not care. Got one in here. There are times when I'm more functional and times when I'm less functional, and this is probably one of the times when I'm a little less functional than usual, and that's, you know, you're going to have to forgive me for that because that is what it is. that. It's a single statement, so we can put that there. Although I will need to, for the VST, I'll need to have two of them. Yep, Adam, I can do that. I can do that. What it will sound like is fading between what we hear now and a soft clip. That's what that's going to sound like. And when I do it, I can show you what it's doing, and you'll see that it's doing what you describe. You know, what I'm here for is telling you it is going to sound like this, rather than just, if you did this, what would it be? Like, I can answer that question for you. We can do that. We will do that. I have to add the semicolon. We will do that, and it will sound like I describe, which is the note that you get, we're fading between that and soft clip. So, stages is the one that I'm concerned with. I'm tempted to add the stuff that I'm going to need, so let's just do that. And now I have room to add left and right versions for when I do the other one. And we are probably going to what you need is going to happen here and here, in front of and behind this stuff. Hey, Friskin. So let's do this real quick, because I was trying very hard to get something a little crazier than what we had. You'll hear what I mean by that. So we can make the pitch go up like this. It's not doing Adam's thing yet, but it is doing a thing. But then as we start adding stages of this, we go from a sort of a more chirpy sounding thing. We are adding lots more effect to it, so that's aliasing, that is. And we can see that if we apply this, we've got a behavior where our crossover is zipping up to where it's sitting on very much the same kind of note. We're not going to be needing some of this other stuff as much anymore. Like the pi number that gets introduced here is not useful at all. I'm going to do a tweak on that. But then as we go to this, it goes crazy. We have so many levels of gain that it turns into noise. It goes completely crazy. And this is not really noise, but it's acting like it. And we're going to quit out of here without saving that and adjust some of these things to adapt to the new state of Fracture that we're exploring, because this is a more useful thing to do with Fracture. And then let's go to way more stages, and let's take away this mpi. What am I doing? which actually means we do not need to use that, but so what we're doing here, we've got density, and then input sample equals input sample times input sample plus 1, absolute input sample, meaning that this one starts expanding even more as the sound gets louder. And Fracture used to be based on this rather high number, and that just made things go so crazy because the amount of gain that we're applying relates here. So it was too much, and so we probably don't need Fracture to be that, but we could be applying, using this, applying density, I suppose. Let's find out what we get. Because there's two things happening here. One of the things that's happening, which means we don't actually need Fracture anymore for now. One of the things that's happening is we're adding extra gain. The other thing that's happening is we're adding extra gain as a factor of where the waveform is. So density is also going to play a role in that, unless we wanted to use like, and we have Fracture doing the number of times we repeatedly do this. Let's see what we got. Rather than just kind of try to guess, sometimes it's faster to just look and see. Let's see what we got. And drive needs to go only to 1. Output can remain kind of padded down. Fracture goes much higher now. And that is just very bland and plain. But if we add 1 stage of Fracture, we're starting to get into hearing an extra thing come out. We probably want to add more gain than this, honestly. I dialed back the gain too quick. But now we're starting to hear what it can actually do. And it gets really sensitive as we start getting into this. But an unusual thing is happening. We're not hearing a note anymore. And I'll tell you why. Because we've changed it into a thing where our behavior here, see, this is actually the crossover point, and it's doing a level of kind of increasing frenzy as we go into this stage. It's going into the pitch of this wavy part is just ramping up more and more until it hits the middle, and then it's going back down again. And the literal middle is always going to be where the sine rounds off and goes over, so that will kind of tend to stop. But the more stages of Fracture we put in, the more it will ramp up in pitch as it goes, up to the maximum point, which is where it will ramp up beyond all control or reason. And that's being overlaid onto our sine here. And the reason we can only make it happen with high levels of Fracture is because it took drive down. See, I can go to 4, and that's getting us enough juice to hear a high note in here. And it's a cool little waveform. But we get this thing where we can go into this note, and like I was saying, what Adam was asking for, we can shift everything about this onto one or the other side of the waveform and just bring it in as a overtone on top of the soft clip. And so the additional behaviors of that are what I'm looking into here. And yeah, like all of this, not that, but everything inside here could be scooched up until it's only on one side of the waveform. And that's what Adam's talking about. And we can also have it, and interestingly, that's going to change the way the soft clip works, and that's interesting. See the way this curves up? We're changing the way the soft clip works quite a lot, and that's going to be very interesting. Yeah, we're gonna have a good plugin by the time we're finished with this, boy. Because when we clip at the top, and this point is when it hits pi_2, either positively or negatively, it hits this point, and everything beyond that, back to here again, would be a different calculation. Likewise, this hits negative pi_2. This is the exact point where it hits it, and everything beyond here is scaling all of this between -1 and 1 output. I'm padding it down, which is why it's not taking up the whole space. Otherwise, it would literally take up the whole space, and I know because of what the sine algorithm is that it's -1 to 1. We can scale it and then just sort of fade that in. Honestly, this is the thing Adam wanted, so I should probably just do that in talking about it. I'm like, and it's only this, and so let's go and see about that then. So we have this. And there's like two separate this is going to be consistent regardless. This can still happen. Whatever we do here, it's not going to matter to what happens here, because we're just trying to affect what happens here. And then the scaling is another thing. So what we get out of this is always going to be -1 to 1. So we have to check before we get to that point. And we have to, let's move everything down a notch. Keeping stuff a little bit straight so that I know what I'm doing. This is going to be your thing, Adam, the threshold control, and that's going to be on parameter 3, so I need to go and change this stuff so that I can see what I'm doing. You want that? We'll default all these to 1. So 3 is going to be threshold. We might not necessarily want to start out at 1, but I'm just putting it as that for the moment. And we're not using any of these, but they can still be there. I'm just going to blank them because we're getting closer to a working thing. let's have it be consistent. Save this and close it. And so what we do needs to be living between here and here. So positive stuff goes here. Oh, hang on. Negative stuff goes here. And we don't actually have another if statement. Instead, this is where we have what we originally did. So you know what this does if we run it right now? It means that instead of wavefolding, it will just wildly clip. So one thing we can do is do the soft clip one. So let's do the soft clip one. So what we're doing here is if input sample is larger than, oh, hang on, we don't actually want mpi, we want mpi underscore 2. And that's because that's the half version. There's also a 4 version, I believe. In fact, I can find out right now. Yep, there still is a 4 version. It would not be blue if I was making it up. Like, I think there's not a 3 version. Let's find out. Yeah, see, it's not blue, so it doesn't know what that one is, but it knows what this one is. And it's the 2 we want. So if input sample is larger than 1.57, etc., then we assume the output is going to be 1, and none of these else's matter because this was satisfied, and we drop through to the end. Else, oh, I might not have the right number of these. I guess we can find out whether it works, huh? If it works, then that means that this was correctly done. Because I'm thinking these else statements aren't really assembled very well. So if it's larger than that, it's 1. That's the output of sine if you ran the sine and it was clipped to that. Else, if it's less than negative pi, input is -1. So we got here, and then the if statement, and then we have that. So honestly, this should work. Let's find out. It'll give me an error or do something unexpected if it doesn't work. And we haven't used threshold yet because we haven't got there yet. Components. We're gonna put density back to 4 again. And I don't know whether we need to, let's leave that out. It's going up to such high frequencies, I don't know that we need to use that. We shall see. And back over to our little sine wave. We're going to find out what it does. So if I'm correct, interesting. Why are you not listening to Drive? Curiouser and curiouser. It's not paying any attention to our level setting. Oh, I'm on full dry. That would explain. So. Something's happening, but we don't know what it is, do we, Mr. Jones? Boom. What happened? Oh, actually, we're fine. So this is what it looks like when it clips that way. That is the base level of what we were doing with this. I just didn't recognize it because Fracture works. So, Fracture of 1 means we're not exaggerating things in any way. And so as we go into here, we're applying the additional multiplication once. I suppose Fracture could be 0 if it comes to that. And aha, I see what's going on here. Fracture does need to be 0, doesn't it? We've made a trapezoid maker. This is not actually a soft clip. Not now. Cool, and we need to still fiddle with this. This is going to be really good when we're done with it. So here's our input boost. Here's our clip. Here's stages. Stages only occurs here. Oh, it's much more than that, but we need to adjust this for the moment. Stages needs to have a 0 option. And this starts to lean towards what we're doing with some of this stuff before. Now if we have it set to 0, it's going to act like the soft clip I told you that it was. And then we will have the additional effects that we expected to have. Let's pat it down a little bit, but here's our sine. And with 0 fracture, we purely have a soft clip. A very gentle descending soft clip. As we keep adding levels of fracture, we're adding sort of increasing gain as the volume of the input swings up. So it's kind of compensating in a weird way. It's adding increasing levels of frenzy to the wavefolding, which we're not hearing because we've just skipped it. Wavefolding happens when we start including that sine wave thing in the code where previously it just went to 1 or 0. And I can demonstrate that. Well, I could demonstrate it by just doing it, but so these are the 3 places. And we're going to be using this line of code in each of these places. Because if we just used it in each of the 3 places, we'd get back to the, what we've got now is we can probably just do a simple crossfade. All we need to do this is basically a dry wet. Because if we have a dry wet between the output of the one and the other, and the one is just like hard clipped to this limit, and we start bleeding in the one that is the full modulation, it's going to gradually fade between the one or the other, meaning that it's going to sneak from all the way over and start including a little bit more of going down to the middle and then beyond. Which would also mean that if we do this and it's at exactly 0.5, it's the thing that you wanted. And that is a simpler algorithm than I expected. And that's cool. So let's call threshold more means more of the craziness. You drop threshold to 0 and it acts like the soft clippy thing instead. And which would mean if the wackiness is full threshold, then it would be this. And so far so good. Plus there's our little dry wet control. Threshold goes up, more of this. Threshold goes down, more of this, because it's 1.0 minus threshold. 1.0 minus 0 means all of this side of the equation. Meaning that the only change to the opposite extreme is thus. -1 here. And I'll tighten this up in a moment, but this should do it. Let's build it. How's that, Adam? You watched it being done. Assuming, of course, it doesn't do something crazy and wrong and not work, but I think it's going to work. Fracture2. But we do kind of have to amplify it, don't we? I kind of hear what's going on, though. Here, tell you what. Let's start it with a louder sign. Then we'll be able to hear what it's really doing a little bit more. And we'll feed that into it. And then we should be able to observe the behavior. Soft clip. Wavefold. And what you were asking for was sinoid folding algorithm that allows for a threshold and the return fold to be set. First fold like this, and then the second fold could be somewhere between you're looking for this. There's your first fold, and it can fade back and forth between flat and here. Let's demonstrate it even. Well, hang on a second, because I haven't dived into the stages yet, I need to boost density some more. For now, let's crank density way the heck up. m pi underscore 2 is pi divided by 2. Not multiplied by 2, it's divided by 2 because that's a useful number 2. Or it's a useful number 1.57, etc., etc. And yeah, let us... Did I just make the changes that I needed? Yes, I did. That means I need to build it again. Now I got way more gain, and I can show you more effectively what we've done and demonstrate that it's doing the thing that you wanted, because it's a better demonstration on a higher wavefold, I think. So on the higher wavefold, we can do this. And the wavefold looks like that. As you see, it's the full-on wavefold. Then, if we did threshold, at nothing, we've got a distortion. That's a soft clip. Especially with fracture on 1 as it is. And I've got that much gain so that you can see how much of just ordinary soft clip that is. And then as we start including, want the exact half? 0.5? We'll give you 0.5. And now we've got the wavefold that builds in like this. But it can only wavefold down to the origin point again. Yeah, well, Music Anywhere, the copyright warnings are scary, but they were harmless. I picked stuff that React people get to use. I'm given to understand from Just JP, whose channel I watch, that some of these folks are even doing React things where they're letting the React person share in the streaming revenue. And that's a very bold move. But apparently that is happening sometimes, that there's occasionally people doing that. And so this is what it looks like, blending between the soft clip and the wavefold. And now if we go back again and then do a more subtle blending, we've got a soft clip that just kind of leans into whatever that note is. But wait, there's more, because if we normalize this to 0 dB, then fade it, as always, my hope is that the visuals don't broke. So we have this, and then we apply it to that. We're going to get wavefold, or simple hard clip, or Adam's thing, where it's partly it's fading between that. Now I do wonder whether you're expecting it to be like only by default going back to the origin point again, because that's not the full crank, that's halfway, that's this. Full crank is purely wavefold, it's this, it replaces the sound. So if we do like a subtle version of it, like exactly 1/4. Keep typing and stopped at E. The threshold could be set to whatever you want, basically. And let's show you what this one looks like. Here, we have the waveform coming in, and then we start getting into it, and it starts folding and wrapping, but that's localized. Again, that is localized to where we told it to be. And that area can be as small as you like. So yeah, continue with your question when I figure out what the E means. Yep, that's what I just did. Setting it at 0.25 means that the fold is between full maximum and crossover, which is happening on both sides. So the waveform is symmetrical. If you're thinking asymmetrical, that's a different question. Because we're just going to get into some of the craziness. Of what it means when we start getting fracture involved. Oh, I like that. Oh, we can do fun things with signs with this. This is the kind of stuff that one would do with a modular system. What's that look like? Cool. That's a nice little warble. Crazy little sound. Let's move that thing as quickly as possible because it's becoming increasingly annoying that it has that massive zipper noise going on. That's some massive zipper noise going on. So we're going to open a recent high quality Z filter. Z region 2 ought to do it. And what do we need for our, these need this. Let's grab both of these and we'll have wet also be smoothed. Where'd this go? There we go. This is probably going to work, but it's possible that it won't. We shall see. And this gets changed to but otherwise that's basically the same thing. Over to Fracture2, over to Z region 2. Start those at 0. These at 1 full wet. and sample frames, we need that. In VST, we have to produce it. So Adam, let's see. So with the threshold of 0.5, the point of the lowest fold is crossover. With the threshold at 0.25, the point of the lowest fold is halfway between maximum and crossover. I mean, continue asking if that's not good enough and you need more. Yes. I can make the point be literally full maximum by setting threshold to 0. Like that, it seems to me that is already done. We'll see. If you mean something else, then we'll get there. Let's see now. So here's where some of this stuff comes in. It's going to be kind of like that. So we need double wet, but we're not going to produce it here anymore. Instead, we have these two. They're the last time we saw wet and the current setting that we have now. And the next thing that we do is this stuff. So we're going to want one of these. And we're going to want one of these. And then we're going to want to apply those same things to what density is. So we're going to go here. And as you can see, that's doing the same thing that wet is doing. So we no longer have a density to use, so we put it in here. Changing this stuff. And we start as density A, and then go to density B. It's the same little crossfade thing that we used earlier. And this is now the density, this is now the multiply that we're using. And we're no longer using fracture for anything, so we're leaving that right out. And let's build that, run it, and see if it is a little bit smoother when we do this thing. Don't need you anymore, and over we go. And so if that worked, sounds pretty good to me. So maybe it's a little jittery, and that is because it's only taking in new values. Output's still jittery though. You can't really hear it, but it is. I think we have a plug-in. Needs a little fussing, but and yeah, threshold is going between hard clip, and this is still changing the tone of things. Like we can make a very crunchy little edge here. Adam, really? Wow. I think I have mentioned before about how, I'll tell you, give me a second while I fuss with this. It does need to work. Does need to work. And again, just like you asked, this is the hard clip form. This is all the way to the middle, and this is fully wave folding. Yeah. Well, I gotta say, Adam, I'm really glad that I was able to do this for you. Like I've said, what, 30 years ago, maybe? Around 30 years ago, yeah, it would be. Like my autism hadn't been diagnosed, and my family had kicked me out. Or I was actually living independently, kind of, but they were paying for me, and they were like, yeah, we're not giving you any more money because we think you can just go and work a regular job. When I have stuff like this in my head all of the time, it would tend to get in the way of me working a regular job. And it's taken 30 years to build up to the point where this is even a minimum wage job. And I ended up in the Morningside shelter in Brattleboro very briefly. Didn't stay for very long. I didn't seem to be like the other people in the shelter because the reason I was there was distinct enough from some of the other ones that it didn't come off as the same each time. And yeah, it's a very good shelter. It probably still is, for all I know. I don't know who's still there. Like I said, it's been 30 years. And that has been part of my story. And that's part of why I do what I do, trying to make it so that people have access to stuff that can be a distraction or help them pitch in, which you have now done. You, coming from a place where the kind of place I have been, your shelter might be a little sketchier than mine. Mine was really kind of NERF shelter, as in the Morningside shelter in Brattleboro is indeed a full-on homeless shelter, and people would come in drunk or high and get thrown out. But it was based in an old sort of Victorian house, and it wasn't... I'm not sure what they are. I just know that it's not the same thing as like if you went into a shelter in the Bronx or something. It'd be a lot sketchier. And this one in Brattleboro was a lot more in trying to get people on their feet and find out what was going on with them, that they were struggling so much. And yeah, and you have now helped me do this thing by asking me for this stuff and hanging with me from a same place that I have been in the past. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for speaking up. I'm glad that you said something on every level. On the one, that you suggested this thing that it turned out I was able to do. And on another level, mentioning that that's where you're at now. I hope that you find your way out of there. It's possible to do. It can be a bit of a bumpy road, but it's possible. And I can think of no better... free food is always good, but fair enough. Oh, yeah. One of the people that I met in Morningside was a lady who had dissociative identity disorder. She was with her 9-year-old kid, and that was really challenging. You know, I got to know her, and I was a weird and harmless person so that she wasn't scared of me after a little while. She wasn't allowed to bring weapons into the shelter because otherwise she would really want to have a knife on her at all times and that kind of thing. And I got to talk to her, along with the people at the shelter got to talk to her. And she would tell us, like, yep, well, thank you very much, and I probably can't stay. And that's what happened is she got more and more antsy, and then one day she and her kid were gone. And she was moving on to somewhere else because, you know, she wasn't going to be able to stay. It was a little bit too intense for her. She was just doing the best with what she had, you know, where she was, and going on from there. So yeah, if you have the ability to get to resources or whatever, I completely endorse that course of action. Feel free to continue to chime in on YouTube videos and show up on the live streams and stuff, because I'll tell you what, if you open up like that, my crew will get to know who you are. Kind of like you know David Pixley, the Muzzle. David is a bipolar guy, and the last I heard from him, he's doing all right. He is not as into plugins and music making and stuff as he had been. But he opened up a little bit about stuff like that, and my plugin crew and all got to know him and took an interest. And so we're like, oh, hey, here's David again. And one of the things about that, particularly at the time, David would get manic and be wanting to type all kinds of stuff. If he sent me like 20-page emails, I ended up being just like, you know, I'm only going to respond to some of these, but you can still send them. And so he would still send them, and I would only respond to them. That's the important thing, is not to get hooked into whatever it is that might like really, I had to reach out as much as I could. And so it's like, yeah, by all the means, tell me all of these thoughts and whatever, if that's where you're at. And if it's too much for me to handle, I won't write back. And then I'll write back when I'm comfortable. And that's what I did. And I count David still as my friend. As far as I know, he's doing okay at the moment. He is not as pumped up on plugins and using... there's a particular plugin, ULaw. David was the use ULaw and everything guy. And may still be, it depends. But that's the running gag. And it came from him. And yeah, by all means, open up about what's going on with you. And yeah. And get the Section 8 voucher. Dude, I have a Section 8 voucher. Because I have autism and I've been through these things, and my income is still low enough that I qualify for, like, I ain't putting away money for retirement, put it that way. And I'm very fortunate to be living in a house. That is also something that Section 8 did at one point, and they are very protective about not wanting people in one of their house programs to fall out. And then, that a lot of stuff got involved with that, put it this way. But yeah, if you can be on Section 8, that is a darn good thing to do. Go for it. And yeah. And check in. That is great. That's great to hear about. And if you check in, and my Air Windows crew knows about you and sees how I interact, then what's likely to happen is you will have some friends. They might not be wealthy friends. I'm not that much of a wealthy friend either. But it's nice knowing that people know who you are, and that can have its own merits. So yeah. And again, thank you for the ideas for expanding Fracture in this way. I will finish it up. Maybe I can even put it out next week. That'd be exciting. Because the whole Bricasti thing and doing the reverbs and stuff, it's going to take a little time for that to happen. I've got that paid for. but they ain't shipped it yet. And I still have to make the subwoofer. When I do that, I'll be able to do this kind of thing, and it'll sound better. But I might actually be able to get this Fracture2 thing out next week, and that would be kind of cool and exciting. So on that note, I will go off and finish this stuff up, and I'll talk to y'all later. And I look forward to seeing you. I think I can speak for us all, and that we look forward to seeing you again, Adam. And thanks for the plugin idea. It turned out really well. And let's see, what do I do here? Yep. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.